Another very interesting movement prior to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle is a movement, or I wouldn't call it a movement, but it was a group of people. They were called the Sophists. And the Sophist literally means those wise guys. Now, when we study Sophism, some look upon them with a little bit of disparagement because they weren't so concerned with truth. They really were concerned about winning the arguments regardless of the truth. Does that sound familiar to you in any way? Protagoras, who was a disciple of Democritus. Do you remember Democritus from the first lecture? He was the one with Leucippus who discovered atoms at that early period of our human history. Well, Protagoras was his student, and that made Protagoras a materialist. What Protagoras claimed around 490, shortly after his birth, I guess, it'd be in early years, that man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not. Now, what exactly does this mean? Well, let's take the example of justice. It is possible to argue that justice is an idea apart from any of us, and we discover it through contemplation. That would be Plato who claimed something like that. But Protagoras thought that we create justice, we create truth. Man is the measure of these ideas. It's not something that is there for our discovery, but it's something that we invent. Goodness, truth, beauty, justice, those are all creations of the human mind. Now, that might be a little bit of a problem, don't you think? Especially if we're trying to arbitrate between two conflicting views of what goodness, truth, beauty, and justice are. You might think it is one thing, and I might think it is another, and if we disagree, how are we going to determine who is right? There is no objective measure. Man invents it himself. So, without the objective measure, do you think possibly that might could become right? This is a form of relativism. He was a relativist, but he was also a practical person of politics. He said that success comes through prudent acceptance of traditional customs. Man is the measure, customs are relative, and do whatever works. He was a religious skeptic. Gods, he says, I don't know anything about gods. Now, Gorgias was a follower of Protagoras. His date's 483 to 375 BCE. And Gorgias claimed that there is nothing. In other words, ideas like justice or goodness just simply don't exist apart from the human mind. There's nothing at all to reality. And he says, to support this claim, even if there were something, he said no one could know it. And even if anyone did know it, no one could communicate it. That seems like such a sad state of affairs. But when you think about it, it's a possibility, isn't it? I mean, you can't really climb into the head of another person to understand fully what they're thinking and feeling, perceiving. It leaves us in a situation where we have solipsism, a situation where each person is alone with his or her thoughts and has no possibility whatsoever to establish a common ground with another. That seems a little sad to me. Well, Thrasymachus was one of the Sophists, and Thrasymachus claimed that justice is always in the interest of the stronger person. Thrasymachus was a character in Plato's Republic. You'll come across him pretty soon. Cleese was another sophist who claimed that power is justice. And he said power permits survival. This was his reasoning. He's very practical. Survival permits pleasure. And of course, there we have Callicles. Critias was another of the sophists. And Critias said, a clever rule controls with the fear of non-existent gods. My goodness. Manipulation and expedience are all that matter. It's not truth, but power, manipulation, and expedience. Some would say, the object of interest for the sophist, well, if man is the measure of all things, the object of interest is themselves.